To be frank, I may not be the sharpest or most observant individual, and there's no use fixating on it. Now that I'm aware, I could benefit from some guidance on determining my next course of action. Of course, I still have lingering emotions for her, but I've reached a point where I can no longer tolerate her presence. As for our children, I'm at a loss. Merely contemplating them fills me with a nauseating sensation, often leading me to hastily rush to the restroom to expel all the Jack Daniels. I had a drink that set me back $30. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Simon Messina, and I've been married to Janice for 9 years. We first crossed paths a little over a decade ago when I had an accident at work and injured my hand with a chisel, requiring stitches. Janice happened to be a nurse in the ER, and despite my attempts to catch her attention beyond being a patient, she remained all business. However, I couldn't help but notice her striking appearance, dark hair tied in a ponytail, standing at 5 feet 7 inches with long, fit legs and an attractive figure. While she focused on administering a shot of Novocaine to numb the pain before stitching me up, I found myself captivated by her brown eyes. It's funny how once you become aware of someone, you start seeing them everywhere, a bit like when you decide on a particular car model and suddenly notice it all over town. That's how it was with Janice. I spotted her frequently around town, often in the company of some guy, seemingly content together. One evening, I happened to be at a bar I frequented when I noticed Janice and her boyfriend getting a bit rowdy. Eventually, he stormed off, leaving Janice with her friends, looking visibly annoyed. I averted my gaze before she noticed me, but I couldn't resist listening in. Janice, slightly tipsy, was venting about her boyfriend's jealousy and how fed up she was with it. I left before my eavesdropping became too conspicuous. Approximately 2 weeks later, I spotted her again at the same bar. This time without her boyfriend, surrounded by her girlfriends. The band started playing a song I enjoyed, so I mustered the courage to approach her table. "Hey, I'm not sure if you remember me from the ER a couple of months back. I'm Simon. Would you like to dance?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment before responding. "Yeah, you're the guy with the cut hand." "Sure, let's dance." That's when my journey with Janice began, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. We dated for a month before things became intimate. She wasn't rushing, and I respected that. Our first time together felt like a scene out of a romance novel. We had a delightful dinner at an Italian restaurant, indulging in delicious pasta, 2 bottles of fine wine, and tiramisu for dessert. I didn't plan on getting Janice intoxicated, but I hoped it might help her let loose a bit. We headed back to my place, and up until then, I had been with around 10 women, but nothing compared to that night with Janice. The passion between us was undeniable. I wasn't concerned about Janice's previous experiences in the bedroom, as long as she was now exclusively mine. She had never given me a reason to doubt her commitment. 4 months after our first dance, I decided to take Janice back to the tavern where our story began and proposed to her. She happily said yes, and we chose the first Saturday in June for our wedding. Around 2 months into our engagement, I was hanging out at the same tavern with a friend when Janice's ex walked past our table on his way out. He stopped and glanced at me. "You're Janice's fiancé, right?" he asked. "Yeah, that's me. I hope there's no issue, considering we didn't start dating until after you two broke up," I replied. "Nah, we had our reasons for splitting up, or at least I had mine. I just wish you both the best if you end up tying the knot," he said before leaving. I figured he was simply bitter and shook my head. There are a few more things from my past that you should know, as they become relevant later on. Firstly, I was a standout wrestler in high school and earned a scholarship to a state university. Everything was going well until my junior year when I got injured while wrestling a guy from our rival school. Out of spite for losing, he kneed me in the groin. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital recovering from the injury, and when I finally healed, I was unable to compete for the remainder of the season. I lost interest in school, dropped out of college, and found employment with a local builder. The other wrestler was kicked off the team and lost his scholarship, but I chose not to press charges to move past the incident. Secondly, I experienced the loss of my father when I was 12, and my mother passed away 10 years later. With no siblings and distant extended family, I felt a void in my life. However, I found solace in Janice's mother, Penny, who became like a parent to me. Janice's father had left when she was a teenager, so it was just the 3 of us. Despite Janice sending him cards every year, He never responded or attended our wedding. Instead, her mother walked her down the aisle. Currently, I work as a skilled carpenter specializing in restoration projects. I'm considered one of the top professionals in the business on the West Coast, mainly working on the restoration of old mansions owned by wealthy individuals. My hourly rates range from $75 to $100, allowing me to earn approximately $150,000 annually. Not bad for someone who didn't complete college. However, this occupation requires me to travel and spend 1 or 2 weeks away from home each month. The challenge of working for affluent clients is that they can often treat you as insignificant or even invisible. I once worked for a young actress in Los Angeles who bought a 10,000 square foot house and was spending a fortune on its restoration. While I worked inside, she would often relax by the pool without clothes, seemingly unaware of my presence. On another occasion, while working on a house in Beverly Hills, I witnessed something similar. The lady of the house was having an affair with the pool boy in broad daylight, engaging in intimate activities on a lounge chair, changing positions multiple times. It bothered me because I liked her husband. He treated me with respect as an equal. He was a wealthy Hollywood producer who would come home from work, crack open 2 beers, and have a chat with me about my day and the progress of the job. He would even offer me one of the domestic long necks from his fridge. Although I felt bad about his wife's infidelity, I didn't confront him in case it was part of their arrangement. I didn't want to shatter him by saying, "Your wife is cheating on you." Instead, after completing the job and receiving payment, I anonymously called him at his office to break the news. He thanked me, and later I learned that he was filing for divorce, indicating that it wasn't an arrangement they had. Now, let's shift to my current dilemma. Janice and I have 2 children. This is where you'll realize how foolish I can be. But before you judge too harshly, remember that when our first child was born, Janice and her mother were everything to me. When Janice told me she was pregnant 3 years into our marriage, I was overjoyed. I spent weeks preparing the baby's room, adding oak crown moldings and beautiful sashes around the windows and doors. It was a stunning space. When Jacob was born, I rushed to the hospital within half an hour of Penny's call. I had only scheduled local jobs before and after the due date to ensure I could be there for the birth. Janice was ready for childbirth, and I mentally reviewed LeMay's techniques, preparing to support her through it. 3 hours later, the doctor announced, "Here we go," and little Jacob arrived. While many new dads may feel nervous or even faint during such moments, nothing could have prepared me for the shock when the nurse handed Jacob to me, and I noticed he had some African heritage in his appearance. Both Janice and Penny glanced at Jacob, and then at me. Penny felt that we needed to have a conversation. She took me aside and revealed the truth I should have known earlier. "Simon, we're sorry we didn't tell you sooner, but it's time you knew the truth. My father was of mixed race, with a black mother and a white father. We were afraid you might not marry Janice if you knew she had African ancestry. But that doesn't make sense, Penny. Why would that matter to me? I never judged anyone based on their skin color. I was simply telling you about the guy who ended my wrestling career. That's a relief, Simon, because your son will need your love and acceptance. Also, we never mentioned my brother who lives in Denver." Penny showed me a photo of a man with dark skin from her wallet. "This is my brother, Henry. He's a few years younger than me, and it caused some issues when our family went out because he had darker skin. While I looked white, people could be really rude, staring or even asking intrusive questions. Eventually, my parents moved to San Francisco in the 1960s because it was more accepting. I heard Penny's story, which seemed reasonable, and I didn't want to be one of those rude or bigoted people she mentioned. So I didn't press the matter further. I finally met Penny's brother at the first Christmas after Jacob was born. Janice introduced him as Uncle Henry. Henry mentioned that he was moving back to Portland from Denver to be closer to family, and soon after, he moved into Penny's house. Uncle Henry started visiting our house regularly to spend time with Jacob. However, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable when observing Penny and her brother together. While they never crossed any boundaries, their closeness as siblings seemed unusual. One day during a barbecue at Penny's house, while everyone else was in the backyard, I took a peek into the bedrooms. After checking Penny's and Henry's rooms, I felt relieved seeing that they each had their own space. But appearances can be deceiving. After our second child, a girl named after my mother, Jai, was born, I felt that a family of 4 was perfect for us. We had 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl, which felt like more than enough. I discussed this with Janice, and she agreed that we could focus on raising our two wonderful kids. When I suggested getting a vasectomy, Janice preferred getting an IUD instead, leaving room for us to change our minds in the future. So that's what we decided to do. 2 wonderful years of family life passed, and then I was hired to work on a restoration project for a pleasant middle-aged couple, Sharon and Tim, who are both OBGYNs. One day, during a conversation that touched on topics usually reserved for doctors, I mentioned to Sharon that Janice had been using an IUD for a while. Sharon suggested an alternative, as prolonged use of an IUD can sometimes cause issues for women. She proposed that I undergo a vasectomy but freeze my material as a precaution. I thought it was a good idea and decided to surprise Janice with the news of my vasectomy for Valentine's Day. It might not have been the most romantic gift, but it was better than a household appliance. My doctor referred me to a clinic where I could store my material and have the vasectomy done. The clinic's doctor explained that it would take a few appointments to collect it, so I scheduled appointments for the next 3 Fridays. It felt a bit strange to enter the small room they had set up for collection. They had some adult content there to, get things going. I skimmed through a magazine that featured intimate stories from readers, and I stumbled upon some rather unconventional tales. Some of them made me uncomfortable, like those where husbands watch their wives engage with multiple men or wives seeking well-endowed partners. However, I found enjoyment in a story about a wife surprising her husband with a 3-way involving her best friend. I managed to submit my sample before finishing that story, so I never discovered if it was a one-time occurrence. Afterward, I handed the nurse my sample and informed her that I would return the following week. On a Tuesday morning, the doctor called me and requested that I come in either that afternoon or the next day. I inquired if we could discuss the matter over the phone, but he insisted on a face-to-face conversation. Reluctantly, I agreed to visit the clinic that afternoon. As I drove there, my mind was consumed with worries. I couldn't help but fear that they had discovered something concerning, perhaps cancer in my sperm, given my family's history of early death. Upon arriving at the clinic, the doctor greeted me with a handshake and wasted no time in getting to the point. He asked if I had ever experienced an injury to my scrotum. I recounted the incident when I was kicked in the groin during a wrestling match, resulting in severe swelling that landed me in the hospital. The doctor explained that this injury likely caused fertility issues, as my sperm count was extremely low, making natural conception highly unlikely. Stunned by this revelation, I suddenly realized the extent of deception in my marriage and the facade I had been living. In that moment, I made the decision to cancel my remaining appointments, including the scheduled vasectomy. Leaving the clinic, I felt an overwhelming numbness, akin to a character from The Walking Dead. I knew that I had to uncover the truth about my life without arousing suspicion from Janice, my wife. The rest of the day was spent at a bar across the street from the clinic, where I jotted down a list of tasks on the bartender's notepad. Behaving normally, testing the kids, reaching out to Fred, having a conversation with her dad, safeguarding the finances, getting screened for STDs, searching for a new place to live, discovering the truth behind everything, and seeking revenge. Fred is a close friend of mine who recently went through a divorce. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and began tackling the tasks on my list. Janice gave me a hard time about coming home intoxicated last night, but I acted as if everything was fine. My first fib of the day was telling Janice that Fred was feeling down, and we ended up having drinks together. Later, I spent the evening in the garage, both before and after dinner, working on my tools. During dinner, I praised Janice's cooking, inquired about Jacob's day at preschool, and doted on my 2-year-old daughter. The most challenging part came at bedtime when I had to pretend that everything was normal. I kissed Janice goodnight and pretended to doze off. I collected saliva swabs from the kids and myself, then dropped them off at the clinic. Next, I went to the bank to open my own checking account. I called Janice and lied, saying that I had an urgent repair job in law and would be away for a few days. Instead, I flew to the Keys to meet Janice's father, whom I had never met before. It struck me that I was telling more lies than ever before, and while it didn't feel good, it seemed necessary for the time being. At the airport, I called my friend Fred to discuss the possibility of my marriage deteriorating. Since he was at work, we planned to have a chat when I returned from Florida, and he promised to keep our conversation confidential. Larry Adanos, who operated a charter fishing boat in Key West, was taken aback by my call but agreed to meet. I flew to Miami, rented a car, stayed overnight at a hotel, and planned to drive to his marina the next day. At precisely noon, Larry steered his boat to the dock. His two clients disembarked with their catch of fish. Larry, a handsome man standing around 5 with a slim build, gray hair, and a deep Greek fisherman's tan, scanned the area until he spotted me, likely recognizing me from the Christmas card Janice had sent him with our family photo. He approached me and extended his hand for a firm handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, Simon." "I'm guessing this isn't just a social call," he said, getting straight to the point. I quickly explained why I had sought him out. "Wait a sec," Larry asked, trying to hide a smile. "Penny told you that Henry was her brother?" "Heck no," I replied. "He's her on and off lover, and the reason why our marriage fell apart. People think I'm the bad guy for leaving my family, but let me tell you why I'm here in Key West." Larry proceeded to share his story. Janice started playing basketball in grade school, and by high school, she was good enough to join the traveling AAU team. It was a financial strain because I insisted that Penny accompany her as a chaperone. We hoped it would pay off with a college scholarship for Janice, so I stayed home and worked extra hours while Janice and Penny spent at least 2 weekends away each month. Initially, I wasn't concerned about Penny being away because I trusted Janice. I assumed she would inform me if her mom showed any inappropriate interest in one of the dads. For the first year, everything seemed fine. However, things took a turn in the second year when the boys and girls elite teams started traveling together more frequently, sometimes twice a month. Janice developed an interest in one of the boys on their elite team named Henry Bishop Jr., to distinguish him from his father, Henry Bishop Sr. Can you see where this is going, Simon? Henry Sr. was on the road with the boys' team as a chaperone, and it turned out that the Adon's women caught the eye of the Bishop men. It seems the Bishops had a preference for white women. As it turns out, Bishop Sr.'s mom was white, as was Bishop Jr.'s. I eventually discovered that every night while they were traveling, Jr. would visit Janice's room, while Penny spent the night with Sr. It seemed like a sweet deal until another parent took pity on me and tipped me off. I hired a private investigator and gathered evidence while they were out of town. By the time they returned, I had moved into the spare room, and Penny was served with divorce papers that week. Penny tried to convince me that it had only happened twice, but that was a lie. So I went through with the divorce. What hurt the most was Janice's betrayal. I thought we had a good relationship, but apparently she preferred her boyfriend's Johnson. So I left Oregon, moved here, and never looked back. I probably stared at Larry with a dazed expression, trying to comprehend how I ended up in such a mess. He looked at me and continued his story without much sympathy. "When I saw the Christmas card with your family photo and the 2 kids that didn't resemble you, I made some calls to my friends out west. They did some digging and told me what they found. Sorry to break it to you, Simon, but chances are your 2 kids are Henry Jr.'s. I don't get it, Larry. If she's involved with this Henry guy, why didn't she just marry him instead of me? Because, my boy, both Henrys have a knack for trouble and ending up in jail. The first time Henry Jr. got caught selling drugs to an undercover cop, he was only 20, a college sophomore on a basketball scholarship. But like father, like son. Just like Henry Sr. Jr. always desired more money, cars, women. He ended up serving a 7-year sentence because he refused to cooperate and was found with an illegal weapon when he got caught. My sources discovered that he was released from prison about a year before your son was born. He messed up again before Jacob was born, committing another felony offense that landed him back behind bars for 18 months. He probably got out just in time to get Janice pregnant with your little girl. I could have intervened once I found out what was happening, but I chose to stay out of it. I didn't know you, and it didn't feel like my place to interfere. I simply assumed you were okay with everything. Nope, not okay at all. I can't believe how foolish I've been for the past 4 years. How could I have been so naive? You're not foolish, Simon, Larry reassured me. You were just in love, and my awful ex-wife took advantage of that. From what I've heard, you're a talented carpenter with a thriving business. That takes intelligence. Let me tell you what I've learned from years of taking supposedly smart people out fishing on my boat. Most of them only excel in 1 or 2 areas, and that's it. They use that knowledge as a shield. My ex and daughter exploited your trust in them as family, as well as your trusting nature. Plus, you were deceived by an expert. Let me explain further. Penny swore she had only been with Henry twice. I didn't believe her, so she agreed to take a lie detector test. And she passed it. The examiner asked the question multiple times, and the results were consistent. Penny was telling the truth. But something didn't sit right with me. So I asked Janice to take the test. Penny was livid, hurling insults at me for putting my daughter through that. Janice clearly didn't possess Penny's skill, and when she took the test, it revealed that the two couples had been involved for 5 months. Consider that a lesson. If they ever offer to take a test to prove their honesty, be wary. I thanked Larry for his insight. He offered to treat me to a drink and dinner, but I declined. It was time to head home and strategize my next steps. I caught the overnight flight to Portland and spent Wednesday working on my plans. The list I made 2 days ago was expanding, including hiring an attorney and gathering evidence. Fred joined me for dinner that night and provided valuable advice. He suggested not hiring his lawyer, but instead using the same aggressive attorney his wife used. We had drinks and shared our frustrations for a few hours, and then he graciously let me stay at his place. That meant one less night tiptoeing around Janice on Thursday. I made an appointment with the lawyer, reorganized my finances, and secured a job out of town for the following week. I also purchased 2 voice-activated recorders. I didn't think video was necessary, and the thought of watching someone with my wife was too much to bear. Listening was bad enough, and if I saw them together, I might lose control and act impulsively. That evening, I returned home from my fictitious work trip. Janice didn't suspect anything as I spun a tale about meeting a famous reality TV star. Every detail I shared was based on an article I read in People magazine at the airport in Miami. Lying was becoming more familiar, although still unpleasant. I mentioned to Janice that I would be in Seattle for the entire following week, working for a wealthy Microsoft executive, which was true. Surprisingly, Janice didn't seem bothered. When she went to bed, I discreetly placed one recorder in the kitchen and another in the bedroom. The next day, after testing both devices, I loaded my tools into my truck for the trip up north. I immersed myself in my work. The clients in Seattle turned out to be a delightful couple with excellent taste and abundant resources. It was a much-needed distraction from an otherwise miserable week. On Sunday night, I drove back home, eager to listen to the recordings the next morning. The act of listening evoked a mix of emotions. It was disheartening to hear Janice and her lover engaging in intimate activities in the bedroom, just as I had anticipated. However, there was a hint of satisfaction because I caught a revealing conversation between Junior and another person. It took place after Janice had stepped into the shower. Here's what the recorder picked up. "Hey man, you ready for this? I just got some inside info on a big opportunity." Janice was at the clinic and overheard an elderly couple discussing their upcoming trip to Israel. She gathered enough details for us to know it'll be an easy job. Janice even found out their address, and it's in a nice part of town. If you're interested, let me know. I'm scoping out the place tomorrow, and they'll be away next month. Whoever Junior was talking to must have agreed because the rest of the conversation revolved around planning the robbery while the elderly couple was out of town. Now, I faced a dilemma. Should I report Janice when I turned Junior into the police? It would be fitting if Janice spent some time behind bars. However, I wasn't keen on babysitting kids who weren't mine while their parents lounged in jail. Okay, whenever I read about weak husbands, they always say they still love the kids and so on. Maybe my wounds were still too fresh, but at this moment, I couldn't care less about Janice's kids. They could end up in jail alongside her, thanks to my lying witch of a mother-in-law, who can spend her retirement years raising the offspring of her lies. Over the next month, I maintained a composed demeanor and exercised caution around Janice. The covert recorders continued to capture audio while I was away for work most of the time. Junior remained unaware of being recorded as he casually conversed with his partner, inadvertently revealing intricate details about their upcoming heist. On the night of the robbery, I feigned being out of town but instead parked a rented car near my house. Once Junior and his accomplice departed the scene, I dialed the police from a disposable phone, posing as a concerned neighbor. "Officer, my neighbors are away, and I just witnessed 2 individuals loading items into their dark brown van with the license plate number XYZ. They drove off south on Hawa Drive." I trailed them from a distance and observed as the police surrounded the van, ultimately apprehending the 2 criminals. Here's where the situation becomes delicate. The night before the heist, I discreetly planted a tool under the driver's seat of Henry's van. While I'm not proud of this action, oddly enough, it doesn't keep me up at night. Let's just say a close friend provided the tool, and I meticulously removed its serial number to prevent any trace back to them. Given Henry's previous convictions, possessing such a tool would constitute his third strike, potentially leading to a lengthy prison sentence under our state's three strikes law. Considering his involvement in a home robbery, my guilt over planting the tool was fairly minimal. It served as a precautionary measure to ensure he wouldn't receive a lenient sentence. Phase 1 of my revenge was accomplished. When I returned home the following day, I found Janice in tears in the den, her mother consoling her on the couch, and a miserable-looking Uncle Henry occupying my favorite chair. "What's happening, Janice? Why are you crying?" I inquired. Through her tears, she explained, "Oh, Simon, it's terrible. A close friend of mine is terminally ill with cancer." As she spoke, I realized that Janice had learned the art of deception from her mother. It also dawned on me that I would never obtain the answers I sought. Janice was too skilled at misleading to provide a straightforward account. "Well, Janice, I hate to add to your distress, but here are the divorce papers." "It's over," I declared, dropping the bombshell. The scene that unfolded resembled something out of a cliched sitcom, with all three of them wide-eyed and flabbergasted. That memory will forever be etched in my mind. I left without uttering another word, hopped into my truck, and drove southeast. Janice would officially receive the divorce papers the following day, delivered by someone from my lawyer's office. The copy I left behind, along with a personal letter, served merely as a source of personal satisfaction. The letter read, "Janice, you deceitful individual. Our divorce will be handled by my lawyer. I have relinquished the house to you, but have taken everything else from our accounts, except for $3,000. You can handle the mortgage bills and other financial matters. They are no longer my concern. I am aware that those children are not mine. I will miss them, but I cannot look at them without being reminded of how you deceitfully conceived them. Perhaps Henry can assist in supporting his two children by engaging in other means while in prison. It is in your best interest not to contest the terms of the divorce. I would loathe to witness both parents of your children incarcerated, leaving them to be raised by your mother and Uncle Henry. Yes, I know you disclosed the old couple's travel plans to Junior. If Henry doesn't betray you and you refuse to comply with my conditions, I will contact the authorities and request that they investigate the clinic records to identify the person who leaked the couple's itinerary. Believe me, I will do it without hesitation and derive amusement from the situation. Don't even think about reaching out to me in any way. After discovering recent revelations about you and your mother, I'd rather converse with a wild animal than hear your deceitful voice again. I could wish you good luck, but that would be insincere. Instead, go to a place of misery and inform your wretched mother that she is welcome there as well." Simon, Phase 2 of my retaliation was accomplished. Phase 3 will require patience, but if everything goes according to plan, it will be quite entertaining. Over the past month, I successfully acquired 2 colonies of carpenter ants through an online purchase. It's astonishing what one can buy on the internet these days. During a visit to Penny's house, I surreptitiously made my way to her basement and discreetly placed the ant colonies in hidden locations. Over the next few years, the ants will gradually weaken the support beams and walls until the house becomes uninhabitable. Considering Penny's lack of cleanliness, it's highly unlikely she will ever notice a thing. Did I mention that for the past 6 years, I have been covering all of Penny's utility bills and household expenses? Back then, I willingly paid each bill, believing it was the least I could do for such an exceptional mother-in-law, the woman I once regarded as a second parent. However, that was before I discovered her involvement in deceiving me. Given my control over the bills and the fact that the house was mortgage-free, it was a simple matter for me to cancel her homeowner's insurance, which I promptly did that month. No one would suspect a thing until they attempted to file a claim for damages caused by the ants. This marks Phase 4. As the Sicilians say, revenge is best served cold, and indeed it was for me. On the day I drove away in my truck, I had all the necessary clothing, funds, tools, and personal belongings to embark on a fresh start. I made my way to the Florida Keys, where Larry assisted me in selling my truck and purchasing a boat. It will take some time to establish myself in the Caribbean, but I possess the means to make it happen. I loaded my tools onto my newly acquired 34-foot motorboat and set sail for the islands. For the next 3 years, I resided on the boat, taking on various odd jobs and specializing in finishing work across different islands. One of my former clients, a wealthy Microsoft executive, acquired a small island in the Bahamas, where I spent 4 months constructing his new residence. I even completed interior rooms on 2 mega yachts owned by Saudi princes. Life in the islands is unlike any other place. It consists of a mix of working class and impoverished individuals, a small middle class, and only a select few affluent individuals. Over time, I built a solid reputation among the wealthy residents across different islands. Keeping my living expenses low certainly aided in this endeavor. After 3 years, I found myself earning more than I spent, and let me tell you, I had a fantastic time meeting women during my stay here. It's nearly impossible not to, as many women come to the island in search of adventure. While some are seeking an authentic local experience, there were still plenty left for me. I kept in touch with a few friends back in Portland, especially Fred, who had reconciled with his ex-wife. I made it clear to all my friends not to disclose my location to Janice or share my cell number with her. During the second year of my island getaway, I convinced Fred and his wife, Emily, to join me in St. Martin for a week on my boat. I was excited to catch up with an old friend. Imagine my surprise when I arrived at the dock to pick them up and found Janice standing there with them. She looked stunning, even in her mid-30s, with a body that could rival a 20-year-old's, flaunting it in a bikini top and shorts. To avoid any confrontation, I maneuvered the boat about 40 feet away from the dock and reversed another 100 feet before cutting the engine. Right on cue. Just then, my cell phone rang. It was Fred. Fred, what's going on? Why did you bring her here? Simon, it's not my fault. Janice has been hounding Emily for information about you. When she found out about our trip, she practically forced Emily to bring her along. Emily made it clear that if I didn't agree, I wouldn't get any action for the next year. Fred, you held up your end of the deal, so at least you won't be stuck solo for the next year. But you're not joining us on the boat this week. My bad. You might want to head back home, or if you're staying, try the casino hotel. They're usually not busy this time of year. Later. As I ended the call, I could hear yelling from the dock. It seemed like both Emily and Janice were on the verge of losing their temper. I called down to Kelly in the boat's galley. Hey, Kelly, mind coming up on deck? Kelly, a school teacher I met at a party organized by my Microsoft client last year, was spending her summer break cruising the islands with me. Let me tell you, she's stunningly beautiful. We were just friends with benefits, though. She was bound to marry a millionaire someday, but for now she was enjoying her 20s to the fullest. A week later, Fred sent me an apologetic email, expressing his understanding of my actions. He and Emily stayed on the island for the week, but Janice flew back home after spending the rest of the day in tears. So, maybe that was phase 4. And perhaps after that incident, you, the reader, might think I was finished. But I wasn't. As they say, revenge is best served cold. It was my 4th year in the Caribbean, and I was working on a remodeling project in St. Bart's for a wealthy French family. I understand that some Americans may have reservations about the French, but personally, I've had a positive experience. I took the time to learn some French, and my attempts at conversing have been well received by the people I've met. The job I was working on was expected to take at least a month, and after the first week, the homeowners returned to their homeland. 2 days later, their daughter arrived. The moment I laid eyes on her, I was instantly captivated. I don't know what the French call it, but my Italian mother would say I was smitten. What's more, as this young lady placed her suitcases down, she looked at me and greeted me with a smile that lit up her face. Hello, Mr. MSA. My parents informed me that you would be here working, but they assured me it would be fine as long as I stayed out of your way. I was tempted to respond by saying that all I wanted was for her to be in my way. Excuse me, miss. You know my name, but I don't know yours. Did my parents not inform you that I was expected? I asked with curiosity. No, I'm afraid not, she replied. Then I apologize. My name is Simone. If you prefer, I can find a room in town while you work. It wouldn't be too much trouble. Please, feel free to stay here. Your parents were comfortable staying in the house while I worked. Unless the noise bothers you, I've been staying in the guest house, but I can go back to my boat at the marina if you'd prefer. My parents said you were a polite gentleman, and they wouldn't have allowed me to come if they were worried. Please continue using the guest house. I'll feel better knowing there's a gentleman nearby, Simone insisted. The following weeks felt like a dream. Simone embodied the classic French woman stereotype from the movies I had seen. At 54, she had a petite figure that suited her well, with short black hair reminiscent of Audrey Tautou from Amélie. She moved gracefully, like a dancer. I was completely infatuated, and she was amazing. Despite her privileged upbringing, she was down to earth. Most days, she prepared lunch herself, and we would enjoy it together on the patio. During our first lunch, we playfully joked about our similar names. Simone had a fantastic sense of humor, and I did my best to make her smile or laugh, just to witness her joyful expression. My infatuation remained, and by the end of the second week, I was deeply in love. She courageously broke the ice. Simon, I see how you look at me, and I think I understand what it means. I also believe you're aware of the difference in our social status, and that's probably why you've kept your distance. But let me tell you what I see. I see a remarkable man who has overcome life's challenges and still finds joy. You're not bitter, you continue to seek happiness. While I may be beautiful and wealthy, I haven't achieved much on my own. I strive to be kind and good, and I believe I am. What I'm trying to say is, please don't doubt yourself. See me as a woman who has fallen for a remarkable man. I couldn't believe my luck. This incredible woman was asking for a chance with me. Without hesitation, I held her close and kissed her. We kissed passionately for a while before she suggested, "Let's go to your room." We made love, and I put in every effort, remembering everything Janice had taught me about satisfying a woman. She kept repeating, "Oh my God," as we continued for hours until exhaustion finally overtook us, and we fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up with Simone still on top of me, smiling down at me. She moved just enough to keep our intimate moment going, and then she said something that made me feel on top of the world. "Where did you learn to please a woman? You make love like a Frenchman." I could have been content with my new life, feeling complete and fulfilled. But there was one last thing I needed to do. 5 years after marrying Simone and a decade since parting ways with Janice, I shared a photograph with Janice from our residence in Paris. The picture featured me, Simone, and our 2 children. Yes, we pursued the in vitro fertilization method. The photo was taken on the beach during our trip to visit Simone's parents in Street. Simone appeared incredibly beautiful in her bikini, and both Jules and Juliet had radiant smiles. Alongside the image I inscribed, "From me, my spouse, and our 2 incredible children, we extend warm wishes for a joyful Christmas and a prosperous New Year."